I will tell you the exact moment I knew something was wrong, and it is not the moment you would expect. It was not when the man crouched down to my son's level. It was not when he pointed away across the forecourt toward the painted carousel horses by the south wall. It was the half-second before any of that, when I saw the guard's eyes move. You have to understand what that means. I had stood in front of that gate a dozen times in my life, the way everyone in the city had, and I had never once seen the guard's eyes move. That is the whole point of him. He is the man who does not move. He stands in his red tunic with the tall black bearskin and the white gloves and the rifle held just so, and the children dare each other to make him laugh, and the tourists wave their hands in front of his face, and he is a statue. He is a statue on purpose. That is the discipline. That is the thing the city loves him for. And on a bright cold morning in the Lion's forecourt, with my son's hand having just slipped out of mine for no more than a breath, I watched the statue's eyes track sideways across the crowd, and they came to rest on something behind me, and they did not move on. I turned to follow them, and that is when I saw the man crouching down in front of Daniel. My name is Hannah Carr, and Daniel was 4 years and 3 months old that day. I want to be careful telling this, because it has become a story people repeat, and stories get bigger and stranger in the repeating, and the true thing that happened is large enough that it does not need any help. So I am going to tell you only what I saw and what I learned afterward, and I am going to leave out the parts where I have filled in the gaps with my own fear, because my own fear, that morning, would have filled in anything. We had come for the carousel. That is the small, ordinary reason a family ends up at the gate of a palace on a Tuesday. There was a fair set up in the forecourt that week, a charity thing, painted booths and a brass band and the old hand-cranked carousel with its chipped horses, and the whole point of the morning was that Daniel had been promised a ride on the carousel for 2 weeks and had asked about it every single day, and I had finally said yes. My husband was working. It was just the two of us. I had his hand the entire walk there, the entire time in the queue at the gate, the entire time we drifted along the booths. I am telling you this because the thing people always think, the thing I thought myself for months afterward in the worst hours, is that I must have let go of him, that I must have been on my phone or talking to someone or careless. I was not careless. I want to say that plainly because if you are a parent reading this, you have had the thought too, the cold one at 3 in the morning. It would never happen to me because I am careful. And the truth, the hard truth I learned that day is that careful is not enough. I had his hand. We stopped to look at a booth where a woman was selling little wooden whistles shaped like birds, and Daniel wanted to look at the whistles, and I bent to look at the whistles with him. And for the length of time it takes to pick up a small wooden bird and turn it over and set it down again, his hand was out of mine. That is all it was. That is all it ever is. When I straightened up, he was 4 steps away, and a man was crouching down in front of him. The man did not look the way you imagine such a man looks. This is the part I find hardest to make people understand. He was ordinary. He was perhaps 40 in a gray coat, clean, unremarkable, the kind of man you would pass 1,000 of in a market and never see one. He was smiling at Daniel, an easy, warm, practiced smile, and he was pointing past the booths toward the carousel by the south wall, and I could see Daniel's face turning to follow the pointing finger, lighting up, because the carousel was the whole reason we had come in here, was a kind man pointing the way to it. And every single thing about it was normal. A man bends down, points at a carousel, smiles at a child. If you had filmed it and shown it to 100 people, they would have seen a stranger being friendly. I myself, in the first half-second, felt only the mild reflexive alarm of a mother whose child has drifted 4 steps off, the alarm that says go and collect him, not the alarm that says run. I started toward them at a walk, a normal walk. But the guard's eyes had not moved on. I had seen them lock and I had seen them stay, and some animal part of me read that before my thinking part caught up. Because I knew the way the whole city knew that this man's eyes did not move. He did not look at the tourists who waved their hands at him or the children who pulled faces. He looked at nothing. He looked through everything. That was his entire profession. And here he was, this immovable man, 15 feet away at his post by the inner gate, and he was looking at one specific thing in a forecourt of 300 people, and the thing he was looking at was the man crouching in front of my son. I think I would have reached them in time on my own. I tell myself that, on the good days. On the honest days I am not sure, because what happened next happened faster than my normal walk, and it happened because the guard had already understood something I had not. The man in the gray coat stood up. He did it smoothly, naturally, the way you stand up when you are done crouching, and as he stood he put his hand out, not grabbing, nothing you could point at, just an open hand held low and to the side, the way you offer a hand to a child you are walking somewhere with. And Daniel, who had been promised a carousel and had just had it pointed out to him by a kind, smiling man, lifted his own small hand toward it. And the two of them began to walk, toward the south wall, toward the carousel, yes, but the carousel was where the crowd thinned, where the booths gave way to the long shadow of the wall and the service gate that the carnival trucks had come in by, the gate that stood open onto the side lane, toward the edge of the crowd, toward the place where the 300 people became 30, and then became none. I want to describe the next 4 seconds precisely, because they are the 4 seconds the whole thing turns on, and because I have replayed them more times than I have replayed any 4 seconds of my life. The guard moved. I have to choose my words here because if I tell you he ran, you will picture something frantic, and it was not frantic. If I tell you he marched, you will picture something slow, and it was not slow. What he did was come off his post in a single clean motion, the way water comes over the edge of a full glass, no wind-up, no shout, no scramble, just the statue becoming a man between one of my heartbeats and the next. The rifle was still in his hands. The bearskin was still on his head. He came down off the low stone step of his post, and he crossed the forecourt in a straight diagonal line, fast, the white gloves and the red tunic cutting through the drifting crowd, and he did not say a word. The man in the gray coat did not see him at first. That is the thing about a man who is leading a child away with a smile. He is watching the child, keeping the child happy, keeping the child moving, and he is not watching the gate behind him, because the gate behind him is just a man who does not move. I started to run then. I know I called Daniel's name, because people told me afterward that I had screamed it, though I do not remember the sound. I remember only that I was suddenly running, and that the distance had become enormous, the way distance does in dreams, the forecourt stretching out between me and my son, and the man in the gray coat and Daniel were 10 steps from the open service gate, and the guard was cutting the angle. He reached them first. He did not tackle the man. He did not strike him. I have thought a great deal about why, and I think it is because the rifle in his hands and the discipline in his bones told him there was a 4-year-old standing exactly between him and any violence, and the whole purpose of crossing that forecourt was the 4-year-old, and so the one thing he could not do was create a struggle where the child was. So he did the thing that I will remember when I have forgotten almost everything else. He stepped past the man entirely, between the man and the service gate, and he turned, and he came to a halt with his back to the open gate and his front to the two of them, and he was simply there, a wall of red and black, blocking the way out as completely as the gate itself would have been blocked if it had swung shut. And he looked down at my son, and his voice, I had never heard the guard's voice. No one I knew had ever heard the guard's voice. His voice was low and steady and warm, and he said, "Hello, soldier. I think your mum's just behind you." That was all. He did not lunge for Daniel. He did not snatch him. He gave my son a reason to turn around. And Daniel, 4 years and 3 months old, turned around to look for his mum, and saw me running toward him with my face the way my face must have been, and the spell broke, and he started to cry and run to me, and I had him, I had him in my arms. I had the whole solid, warm weight of him crushed against me, and over the top of his head I was looking at the man in the gray coat. The man in the gray coat had stopped smiling. I need to slow down and tell you about the guard properly, because everything I have told you so far I saw with a mother's eyes, and a mother's eyes are not fair witnesses. They make every stranger a monster and every rescuer a saint. So let me tell you what I learned about him afterward in the quieter days, when I went looking for the truth of what had actually happened on that forecourt and why. His name was Corporal Aldous Vane, and he had stood the Lion's forecourt post for 6 years. He was 31. He was, by every account I gathered, an utterly unremarkable soldier in the way that the very best of them are unremarkable, never in trouble, never decorated beyond the ordinary, never the one telling stories in the canteen. The sergeant I spoke to, a big quiet man named Pell, told me something I have held on to. He said, "People think the job is standing still. The standing still is the easy part after the first year. The job is seeing. You stand 4 hours, 6 hours, and the whole time you are reading the crowd. You learn it like a language. You learn what a normal forecourt looks like, the shape of it, the temperature of it, and when one thing in it is wrong, it lights up like a coal." He tapped the side of his own eye. "Vane was the best reader I ever posted. He'd have told you it was nothing special. It is the most special thing in the world. It just doesn't look like anything." I asked Pell what Vane had seen. What lit up like a coal? Because the man in the gray coat had done nothing. At the moment Vane's eyes locked onto him, the man had done nothing at all but crouch and smile and point. And Pell told me the thing that I think about most, the thing that I would want every parent in the world to hear. He said it wasn't the man, it was the child. I did not understand. Pell explained it to me slowly, the way you explain something to someone who is still half inside their fear. He said that a stranger crouching to talk to a child is the most ordinary thing in a forecourt. It happens 40 times a morning. Friendly people are everywhere. What Vane read, what the language of the crowd told him in the half-second before anyone else could have known, was not the smile on the man's face. It was the body of the child. He said a small child who is being talked to by someone they know, a relation, a family friend, leans in. Their feet point toward the person. Their whole little frame opens because they are safe. And a small child who is being talked to by a stranger they have been told is friendly, a child who is being charmed, does something else. The child's face turns toward the stranger because the stranger is interesting, but the child's feet stay pointed back the way they came, back toward the parent they have just drifted from. The top half leans in. The bottom half is still tied by an invisible string to home. Vane saw a child whose face was sold, Pell said, and whose feet weren't. He saw a kid being led who didn't know yet that he was being led. That's the thing that lights up. That's the wrongness. The man could fool you and me and the kid. He couldn't fool a 4-year-old's own feet, and he couldn't fool the man whose whole job is reading feet. I have never forgotten that. I have told it to every parent I know. The feet do not lie. The child's own body knew, before the child knew, before I knew, that it was being walked away from safety, and it left a small, honest sign, and there was one man in 300 whose entire life had trained him to see it. But I am ahead of myself. Let me go back to the forecourt, to the moment I had Daniel in my arms and was looking over his head at the man in the gray coat, because the story is not over there. The story, in some ways, is only beginning there, because catching a man is not the same as the man being caught, and a great deal of what made that morning matter happened in the minutes after the running stopped. The man in the gray coat looked at me holding my son, and he looked at the guard standing between him and the open service gate, and I watched him make a decision. I watched the warmth go out of his face like a light switched off, and something cooler and quicker come into it, the calculation of a man working out his exits. And he did the thing that such men do, the thing that I had not known to expect, and that nearly worked. He became reasonable. He spread his hands and he smiled again, a different smile, an apologetic, rueful, what a silly misunderstanding smile, and he spoke to me directly over the guard as if the guard were furniture. "I'm so sorry," he said, and his voice was perfect, easy and kind and a little embarrassed. He looked lost. He was crying, poor little chap, looking for the carousel, and I was just walking him over to it. "I should have looked for you first, I'm sorry. I've got little ones myself. You panic, don't you? I'd have done the same." He took a small step, a casual one, the kind of step a man takes when a thing is settled and he is about to go on his way. "No harm done. He's a lovely boy. You take care now. And here is the thing I am ashamed of and that I have made my peace with, because I think you would have done it too." I almost believed him. In the flood of relief, with my son safe in my arms and my heart slamming, the easiest thing in the world, the thing every fiber of me wanted, was to accept the explanation that made the world ordinary again. He looked lost. I was just helping. A kind man. A misunderstanding. The story where nothing was really wrong is so much warmer than the story where something was. I felt the relief reaching for that warm story like a hand reaching for a railing. The guard did not move. The man took another casual step toward the side, toward the lane, and the guard shifted, not a dramatic motion, just a quarter turn of his body and a single quiet step. And he was in the way again. Calmly, completely. And he spoke, and again it was that low, steady voice, and he was not speaking to me, and he was not speaking to the man. He spoke to the air in front of him, the way I would learn a guard speaks when he is on his post, and a thing must be said, but his eyes must stay where they are. He said, "Stay where you are, please, sir. The sergeant's coming." And only then did I see that, behind the guard at the inner gate, 2 more men in uniform were already moving across the forecourt at a fast walk, and that one of them was speaking into a radio, and that somewhere in the last 60 seconds, without my noticing, without the crowd noticing, without the man in the gray coat noticing, the gate behind the guard had quietly become not a gate but a trap, and the man had walked into it smiling. The man in the gray coat stopped being reasonable. This is the part that ended the warm story for good, the part that, when I think of it, makes my hands go cold even now. Because a man who has truly only been helping a lost child does not, when a soldier asks him to wait for the sergeant, look left and right at the crowd to count the exits. A man who has only been helping does not let his weight come up onto the balls of his feet. A man who has only been helping does not, in the instant he believes no one but the guard can see his face, let that face show what the man in the gray coat's face showed for one bare second before he caught it and smoothed it over again. I do not have a good word for what it showed. The closest I can come is that it was the face of a man who has been interrupted at work. He looked at the guard and he weighed him. I saw it. He weighed the rifle and the white gloves and the stillness, and I think for 1 second he considered whether he could shove past, whether the man holding a ceremonial rifle in a crowded forecourt would really stop him, whether the soft, slow statue would actually do anything if he simply walked. And the guard let him weigh it. The guard did not threaten. The guard did not raise the rifle. He simply stood, with the open gate at his back and the man in front of him and a 4-year-old's mother and a 4-year-old 4 feet to the side, and he was a wall, and his stillness said the only thing that needed saying, which was, "You will not get past me, and we both know it, and the only question is how much worse you would like to make this for yourself." The man in the gray coat decided not to make it worse. The sergeant, it was Pell, I learned later, the big quiet man, arrived at his shoulder, and another guard at the other, and the moment of calculation closed, and the man's face put on the reasonable, rueful look one more time, and he began to explain again. The lost child, the carousel, the misunderstanding, the little ones of his own. And Sergeant Pell, who had not been there for the eyes and the feet and the invisible string, looked at Corporal Vane, just a glance, one professional asking another a single silent question. And Corporal Vane, eyes still forward, still holding the line, said 4 words. He said his feet were wrong. I did not understand it then. I understood it later, when Pell explained the language of the crowd to me. But Pell understood it instantly, because they spoke the same language, and whatever passed between those two men in that glance and those 4 words was enough. Pell put his hand on the man's arm, not roughly, and he said, "Then we'll all have a chat, sir, and sort the misunderstanding out properly." And the way he said it, with the same flat courtesy the guard had used, made it perfectly clear that there would be no walking away, that the chat would happen somewhere with a door that locked, and that the man in the gray coat was no longer a free man on a Tuesday morning, but a thing that had been caught. They walked him toward the inner gate. He went quietly. They always go quietly once it is hopeless. That is a thing I have learned. The whole forecourt had not even fully registered that anything had happened. The brass band was still playing. The carousel was still turning. Most of the 300 people drifting among the painted booths never knew that a small boy had very nearly been walked out of the open service gate, and into the side lane, and into the rest of his life, or the absence of it, and that the only thing standing in the gap was a man whose job everyone thought was to stand still and look handsome for photographs. I want to tell you what came afterward, because I think the afterward is where the true weight of the thing lives, and because the man in the gray coat was not what any of us first thought, and the truth of him is part of why I am telling this at all. I sat in a small bare room near the gate with Daniel on my lap, and a kind woman from the household staff brought us tea and a biscuit for Daniel, who had stopped crying and was now mostly interested in the biscuit, the way small children are, having no idea that the worst thing that has ever almost happened to them has almost happened to them. And a quiet man in a plain suit came and asked me questions, gently, the same questions twice, the way they do, and I answered them. And then he told me some of what they had found, because he said, and I have always been grateful to him for this, he said that I would imagine worse if I did not know, and that the truth, hard as it was at least bounded, whereas my imagination was not. The man in the gray coat was known. Not to me, not to the city, but to the people whose job it is to know such men. He was not a local. He had come to the city with the fair, or rather, he had come in the days the fair was being set up, drifting into the forecourt the way such a man drifts into any place where families gather and the crowd is thick, and the children are excited and a little unwatched. The plain-suited man did not tell me everything, and I did not ask for everything, but he told me enough to take away forever any last warm corner of the story where it had all been a misunderstanding. The man had done this before. The man had a pattern, and the pattern had a name in the files of the people who hunt such patterns, and the open service gate onto the side lane was not a coincidence of the morning, but a thing the man had noted and chosen, days before, walking the forecourt with his ordinary unremarkable face, learning the shape of it, the way water learns the low place in a field. He had been reading the crowd too, you see. That is the thing that haunts me and steadies me in equal measure. He had a language as well, a terrible mirror of the guard's language. The guard read the crowd to find the child who was being led. The man read the crowd to find the child who could be led. They were both experts in the same small, honest signs, the drifted hand, the leaned-in face, the parent bent over a booth of wooden birds. The only difference, the entire difference, the difference that is everything, was what each of them did when he saw it. One of them crossed a forecourt to take. The other crossed a forecourt to stop the taking. And it happened on that one Tuesday that they were both reading the same 4-year-old at the same moment, and the question of which language one was decided by 15 feet of cobblestone, and a man who had trained 6 years to come off his post like water over a glass. I asked the plain-suited man near the end the question I had to ask. I asked whether if the guard had not seen, the man would have got Daniel out of the gate, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he gave me the only honest answer, which was, "We don't get to know that. We get to know that he didn't." And then he said something I have repeated to myself 1,000 times. He said, "The reason you'll never know how close it was is the reason it wasn't close at all. That's what the man on the gate is for. You're not supposed to be able to see the disasters he prevents. They just quietly never happen, and the band plays on, and everybody goes home. The band plays on, and everybody goes home. I have thought about that more than almost anything anyone has ever said to me. The whole worth of that man standing still in his red tunic, the whole worth of the 6 years and the 4-hour watches and the reading of feet, is that almost all of it is invisible. Almost all of it is disasters that quietly never happened, mornings where a child drifted and was collected, and nothing was wrong because the wrongness was caught in the half-second before it became anything. We will never count those. There is no medal for the thing that didn't happen. There is no headline for the band that kept playing. There is only, very rarely, a morning like mine, where the curtain twitches for 4 seconds and an ordinary mother gets to see, just once, the thing that is always there. They charged the man. I will not pretend I followed every step of what came after, because there was a great deal of it and most of it happened in rooms I was not in, and because for a long while I did not want to know. I wanted only to hold my son and watch him sleep and let the rooms with the locked doors handle the man in the gray coat. But I know that he did not walk free. I know that the things they found once they had him were enough, and more than enough, and that the open service gate at the Lion's forecourt was the last open gate he ever walked a child toward. I take a hard, plain comfort in that. I am not a person who enjoys the thought of any man in a cell, but there are men whose freedom is paid for by children, and I have made my peace with the cost of his. I went back to the gate a week later. I do not entirely know why. Daniel did not come. He was at home with my husband, having his nap, his ordinary blessed boring nap. I went alone, and I stood at the rope line in the cold, and I looked at the man on the post. It was not vain. It was a different guard, a younger one, taller, with the same red tunic and the same tall bearskin and the same white gloves and the same rifle held just so, standing in exactly the same way in exactly the same place, looking at nothing, looking through everything, a statue on purpose. And I stood there, and I watched the tourists wave their hands in front of his face, and I watched the children dare each other to make him laugh, and I watched 100 people walk past him without once wondering what he was seeing. And I felt something break open in my chest that I have never quite been able to close again, because I understood, for the first time in my life, what I was actually looking at. I was not looking at a statue. I was looking at a man reading the crowd. Behind that still face, those still eyes were moving the way veins had moved, tracking, sorting, learning the temperature of the morning, watching for the one thing that lights up like a coal. He was guarding a gate. Yes, the gate behind him, the palace, the people inside it. But he was also, every second, guarding the forecourt in front of him, the families and the booths and the carousel, and the children with their hands drifting out of their parents' hands, and not one of those families knew it, and that was exactly as it should be. That is the whole arrangement. He carries the watching so that we do not have to. He sees the wrongness so that, almost always, we never have to know there was any. I wrote to Corporal Vane. It took me 3 drafts and most of a month, because everything I wrote sounded too large or too small, and there is no right size for the thing I wanted to say. In the end, I kept it plain. I told him my name and Daniel's name and the date. I told him that I knew he had only been doing his job, and that I knew he would say it was nothing, and that I was writing anyway because a man should be told, at least once in his life, the name of a thing he saved. I told him that Daniel was 4 years and 3 months old, and that he liked carousels and wooden birds, and that he was, as of the writing, fast asleep upstairs, and completely fine and entirely unaware that he had ever been anything else. I told him that I understood now that this, a child upstairs asleep and fine and unaware, was the entire point of everything he did, that the not knowing was the gift, that the band playing on was the gift, and that I was one of the very few people who would ever get to know what the gift had cost, and so I felt I owed it to him to say thank you out loud, where he could hear it just once, for all the times nobody ever would. I did not expect a reply, and for a long time there was none, and I told myself that was right, that it would be strange and against the grain of everything he was for a man like that to write back. But months later a single small envelope came, with no return address, and inside was a card, and on the card, in a careful plain hand, were 3 lines. The first line said, "Mrs. Carr, thank you for writing. Most people don't and they shouldn't have to, and that's how I know we're doing it right." The second line said, "I think about your boy's feet sometimes. They were trying to come back to you the whole time. He's a good lad. He just needed someone to point him the right way round, and that turned out to be me, and I'm glad it was." And the third line, the one I have framed, the one I read on the bad nights when the cold thought comes at 3 in the morning, the one that I think is the truest thing anyone has ever said to me about what it means to keep watch over the people you love and the people you will never know. The third line said this: "You think the job is standing still. It isn't. The standing still is just so the moving means something when it finally comes. We stand still all year so that on the one morning it matters, we're already looking the right way." I have read that line so many times the ink has gone soft at the folds. I do not know what became of Corporal Vane. I like to think he is still at a gate somewhere, or has handed it on to another quiet man, and gone home to whatever quiet life such men go home to. I like to think there are children, all over the city, all over every city, drifting 4 steps off from their parents at booths full of wooden birds, leaning their faces toward kind smiling strangers while their honest small feet stay pointed back toward home, and that there are men standing still in red tunics, reading those feet, ready to come off the post like water over a glass on the one morning out of 10,000 when the reading turns to a coal that lights up. You will not see them do it. That is the point. Almost no one ever does. The band will keep playing and the carousel will keep turning, and you will collect your child from 4 steps off and never know whether anything was wrong. And the not knowing will feel like nothing, like an ordinary Tuesday, like the easiest thing in the world. It is not the easiest thing in the world. It is the hardest, and it is being done for you right now by a man who looks like he is doing nothing at all. I know because once, for 4 seconds, I saw the statue move, and I have spent every day since being grateful that I am one of the only people who will ever have to know how lucky I was that he was already looking the right way. Daniel is 11 now. He does not remember any of it. He thinks the only thing that happened that day is that he rode the carousel, which he did afterward twice, because I could not say no to him anything for about a year. He chose the chipped horse with the gold mane. I stood at the rail and held the bar that goes round and watched him go up and down, perfectly safe, perfectly bored with how safe he was, and I cried in a way that he was too young to understand and that I never explained. I have not explained it to him yet. One day I will. One day, when he is old enough to hear that careful is not always enough, and that the world has men in it who read children's feet for the wrong reasons, I will also tell him the better half, which is that the world has men in it who read children's feet for the right reasons, and stand still all year, and look the right way on the one morning it matters. I will tell him about the man in the red tunic who came across a forecourt without a word, and stood between him and an open gate, and gave him a reason to turn around. I will tell him that he turned around looking for his mum, and that his mum was already running, and that between the two of us, the still man and the running woman, he never had to know how close the edge of the crowd had come. And I will tell him the thing I most want him to carry, which is that the man did not save him by being strong, though he was strong, and did not save him by being fast, though he was fast. He saved him by watching all year on 100 ordinary mornings when nothing was wrong, so that on the one morning something was, he was already looking. That is what it means to keep a watch. That is what the stillness is for. The stillness is not the opposite of saving someone. The stillness is the long, quiet patience that makes the saving possible, and you only ever see the 4 seconds at the end. The band plays on. Everybody goes home. And somewhere a man stands very still at a gate, reading the crowd, looking the right way so that it stays that way.